Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
House, come to order. In the absence of clergy, we'll have a minute of silence. Visitors are invited to join members in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A quorum being present, clerk will read the journal of Wednesday, March 30th. Mr. Tokes.
Mr. Speaker, I move to dispense with the further reading of the journal of Wednesday, March 30th, and that the same stand approved.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Tokes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, if I can have the members' attention. The members should have on their desks an A calendar. Mr. Speaker, I move to advance the A calendar.
Without objection, A calendar is advanced.
Mr. Speaker, our principal work for today will be doing all of the bills on debate on the A calendar, and the members, again, should be made aware that their presence in and around the chamber, particularly when votes are being taken, is certainly necessary, and it's beyond necessary, Mr. Speaker. It is required. Mr. Speaker, also, we will do a resolution that's on the main calendar, so that's our principal work for this afternoon. If you have any resolutions or, any housekeeping or introductions.
No introductions. On the main calendar, page 3, resolution. Clerk will read.
Resolution number 483 by Ms. Nolan. Legislative resolution urging FinCEN and the other federal regulators to expeditiously provide clear, well-defined rules for banks and money service businesses.
On the resolution, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Resolution is adopted.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
What page is it on?
Page 3.
Starting with this bill. Hmm?
Calendar, and Mr. Farrell's going to go first. Very good.
On the A calendar, page 3, Rules Report 36. Clerk will read.
Yes.
Assembly Bill number 554C, Rules Report number 36, Budget Bill, an act making appropriations for the support of government.
Farrell?
Mr. Farrell.
Mr. Speaker,
Colleagues, the sun is shining. It's a beautiful day out there. And at the end of the day, when we leave this room, we will have an on-time, balanced budget which meets all of the constitutional requirements of the law and the latest decisions that have come from the Court of Appeals. This budget is balanced. It's approximately $106 billion worth of disbursements when we have finished voting, and $106 billion in receipts. There are a couple of items which come to $1.5 billion that we have not dealt with. Those items are not necessary to have a balanced, complete budget. There are some people that have spoken to those items in the press as to saying that we do not have a finished budget. And those items are items that the money is available right now. We have just not decided how and when we're going to spend the money. The money is in our balanced budget. It is part of it. We have just not decided how and when we're going to disperse it. And those items, of course, are the TANF surplus, block grant money, the Environmental Protection Fund, and HAVA, the election law money. Those will all be decided between now and when we close in June. For those of you, and I think the majority of you, who have not been here in the past, I think you should understand that this budget, I should have said in the past when we had on-time budgets, I think there are a few of us that were here, I have never seen a budget as complete as this budget is. This budget being 99% complete at the end of this day is much further than most budgets that were called on-time budgets in the 70s and 80s when I first came here. That's why we have what we call supplemental budgets, which was how we used to close out, because the question is, what do you do from tomorrow on? And from tomorrow on, we'll be working to do the work of the people of this state, and we will be continuing the negotiations on other items that have to be done. And what we did in the past was, as we were closing out in June, we would put in a supplemental budget that would correct whatever errors were made or whatever changes were done or whatever additional appropriations we decided to make available for our constituents. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a great day today, a beautiful day out there, and I hope for us to be able to get out and enjoy the sunlight this afternoon when we finish doing our day's work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Barraga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just one or two comments before we take up the bill. Certainly, we're going to have an on-time budget, but there are two sides to every story. And I would think that we want to hear the other side. By the time we finish this particular process, overall spending in this budget, as presented to us versus the governor, will be up $1.9 billion. Overall spending from one year to the next will be up 3.5%. Core rate on CPI is 1.8%, so the spending increases again by twice the rate of inflation. This particular budget, we will incur additional debt of $6.9 billion. And as pointed out by the majority in Ways and Means, tax and fee increases up a little over $1.027 billion. Now, based on what I've said, do you think this will have a positive or negative reaction on out-year deficits. It is predicted based on what we're doing here, the out-year deficit will be in the area of $5 billion. So at the end of the day, you will have a budget in place, but at this cost. We will be revisiting this over and over again because this state continues to do what? Not control its spending, not control its taxes, not control its debt. On the bill, who would like to yield on this bill?
Who do you want to yield? Mr. Farrell, you'd like Mr. Farrell to yield?
Yes.
Mr. Farrell, do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Barrett.
You've appropriated $7.74 billion on the Medicaid appropriation, and you've restored something like $572 million in restorations.
That is correct.
Your restorations in total, in terms of taking a look at it from the flip side as far as cost containment, you anticipate on the cost containment side saving $348 million. The governor, with his cost containment provisions, was looking to save $1,094 million. You've got a $650 million gap or so here.
That's correct. That's correct. We restored that amount.
I guess the concern is, when we take a look at this Medicaid cost containment, is there enough? I mean, what is the cost containment here? I mean, $384 million when you have a $45 billion program that's growing at $1 billion to $2 billion every year seems like next to nothing. I mean, how do we continue to control the growth of this when we're talking about such a slight reduction in cost containment as proposed by your side of the aisle?
We're making some reforms in this. Well, first thing, let's begin with, we know the growth of what's going to go on because as we go, because, you know, what really bothers me sometimes in these discussions on health care, it's like a shock and dismay at these increased costs that are occurring. They're occurring because we're giving services to people. They're occurring because we're bringing more people onto care. We're making sure that young people get caught early, making sure that they're being healthy so that we don't end up with pandemics and other things that could occur. We're also spending money because we're getting older and more people are living longer, and in that process they're occurring. So we know what's going to happen. We also know we can see the projected growth, so it should not be a shock to us. The question is, how do we pay for it, and what do we do to make sure that we're getting exactly what we should be getting and we're not wasting things. So one of the things we're looking at is that preferred drug list. We've put that together. We think we've put a program there which will be able to accomplish things that will save money. And there are other programs that we've put in place that we think will be helpful.
Well, there's very little cost containment here. And I think the problem you might run into, you could well run into, is that this commitment to the counties that we're making, for over a 5-year period, they're going to save so many millions of dollars. That could be in jeopardy unless we control the costs at this level. That's the point I'm making. I mean, that scenario with the counties is predicated somehow that we will have cost containment at this level.
Yes.
And your cost containment provisions are next to nothing. There is no cost containment in reality when you take a look at a program of 46 or 47 billion, growing at preferably 4 or 5% a year, and at the county level 11% per year.
And we know it's going to continue to grow.
Right. So you've got very little cost containment in your proposal.
I think one of the things that we were trying to do is by putting in the cap, was to protect the localities and not create a tax shift. We're going to have to deal with those costs at the same time without pushing a little old lady out of a nursing home or telling a child that that child can't come into a health center.
I understand and fully agree with the cap scenario for the counties. All I'm saying is that with so little cost containment, the continued growth of Medicaid will occur, which may well jeopardize our commitment to those counties in future years in terms of the 5-year plan that we've given them.
I think we intend to keep that commitment, and we will keep that commitment.
I think the other point, too,
It may cost us money, but we're going to have to do it.
the other point, when there's so little cost containment, you begin to jeopardize the 1.5 billion that's supposedly coming from Washington, all right, which is predicated on controlling our costs as far as Medicaid is concerned.
Well, that $1.5 million that's coming from Washington is in the category I have under buying the George Washington Bridge. Somebody tried to offer me that, so I'm looking at that at the same time. I think it's not real money. We will be able to capture some money. I think our people are saying we're going to capture a couple dollars on that. Huh? Yeah, and we have collected, we have created a fund that we can collect if that money does come, so we will get some of it. But see, I'd like to go in a different direction, because I think the direction we really got to go in is the fact that we have responsibilities and we have to meet those responsibilities in terms of keeping the commitment to the localities, which I think we will not think, I know we will keep our commitment to the localities, and at the same time keep our commitment to the constituents who need the services.
I don't think there's any doubt, you know, in terms of your approach as you look at that 1.5 billion, because if you really took it seriously, you'd have some real cost containment in this particular budget bill, and then you really don't. So you are jeopardizing possibly that 1.5 billion, and I think you may be jeopardizing our commitment to those counties over the next 5 years.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you, Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Tedisco?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill and on the
On the
budget,
bill, Mr.
if I may.
Tedisco.
I think probably this is as good a time as ever to say any of our individual pieces about this particular budget and this process this year, seeing that I'm one of two of my colleagues on this particular side of the aisle, and I know there's some on the other side of the aisle, who have been through the misery of the dysfunctional process in the late budgets for the last 20 years. Myself and Tom have been here to see all of them on this particular side of the aisle. My learned colleague over here in council said something. He said, not only is it exciting to have the first on-time balanced budget in 21 years, but you will be able to take off those cheesy ties you've been wearing for the last 3 weeks.
What does that tie say, Mr. Tedisco?
It's a budget, my colleague. And,
You had it done very well in advance, huh?
well, I think we're going to do it. I was in Ways and Means, and according to my colleague on this side of the aisle, it may be twins, but at least we got it done. I know it's a pretty large one. I don't want to go there. My colleagues, as we reach this historic event, and I think you'll agree that probably shouldn't be. It's nothing that you and I should be patting ourselves personally on the back for, because you know it's something we should have done every time, all the time for the last 20 years. But it reminds me of an old saying, and that saying is, patience is a virtue. And really the people who have been most patient and most virtuous in this entire process are the people who this victory really belongs to. The heroes are back home doing their job day in and day out, making it possible to have a $106.7 billion funded budget in the 2005-2006 budget year. They are the voters who went to the polls last year, interacted with that fourth estate, the media, and said, look, we're going to give you a mandate. Go back and really change the system. There wasn't a lot of my colleagues who lost elections last year. There wasn't even that many that were competitive. But there were a couple. And in that couple, I think many of us figured out that eventually this might catch up with us. And eventually, we as elected officials might have something to lose. And that something to lose is to have the greatest job that exists in all the world. And that job is to be able to come to this chamber, sit here, and represent the 18.5 to 19 million people we as state representatives and assemblymen have the opportunity to do every year. The greatest job I ever had in my life. And I was an educator for 10 years, and I thought that was great. But this is indeed the greatest job I think I ever had. And I think it gave us a reason to do what had to be done to make the system work. And I think you know what it is. Transparency. Transparency. The 3 men came out of the room, it became 5 men. And anybody who was obfuscating or delaying or dragging their feet behind the scenes and then came out and cleaned up their act and start blaming each other couldn't do that anymore because they were discussing, negotiating, and debating out in front. And then you and I got involved, like we should have been involved for the last 20 years, in those 10 conference committees. And we put those 10 conference committees together, and when they were done, we basically had a budget. Maybe there's 1.5% that we disagree with the governor, but for all intents and purposes, it's a budget. It truly is a budget. And the people who are to thank and the people who are the heroes are the voters and the taxpayers who gave us that mandate last year. Those are the ones I think that helped us to really get this job done. Now, having said that, I think you'll agree, this has to be the longest, most difficult, most painful period of labor for any birth or delivery in the history of the world. 21 years. But now that the dust is settled, and I can say this with some important fact, we have delivered on the due date an 8-pound, 4-ounce bouncing balanced budget because I weighed it. It is 8 pounds and it is 4 ounces. My colleagues, earlier in the year, I said, we've made a good beginning. We did some meaningful reforms and some changes. But I also said a good beginning doesn't necessarily lead to a good ending or conclusion. The good ending will be if not only this year, but in years to come, we start a trend where we have 20 on-time budgets in a row. Then we'll have done what our constituents indeed asked us to do. And that is create a system that moves the process forward regardless of what the disagreements are. Now that's the good news. First on-time budget. We've got a policy here. Looks like it may work. If we continue that, maybe we can continue to do it. But Mr. Barriga made a very good point. This is an 8-pound, 4-ounce budget. Now, my good friend from Amherst, Mr. Hayes, said, on the way in, could you stop at the deli? And while you're at the deli, could you check what a pound of raw roast beef costs? I'd like to bring it back to Buffalo with me. Capital District roast beef, little less than $5 for a pound of roast beef. My colleagues, 8 pounds, 4 ounces. A pound of the New York State budget cost the taxpayers a little bit over $13 billion for every pound. Now, the message there is, take the roast beef because the pork is too expensive. And the message there is simply this. Every single year we've been late with this budget in this year, it's always a question, where can we get more revenues? Where can we get more taxes? Where can we make more spending? The disappointing part of this whole budget is many of you are going to vote against it, and some of you are going to come grudgingly to vote for it based on the fact that it really doesn't spend enough. $106.7 billion doesn't spend enough. If even in any system we are going to be able to come together year in and year out and pass the balanced on-time budget, we're going to have to say at some point, it's not a question of revenues. It's a question of spending priorities. If you want Medicaid reform, if you want funding for education, if you want safe roads and bridges, if you want a healthy society in our community, if those are the priorities, you can't spend and build new programs with new constituencies who are going to come back every year bigger, with more and stronger, asking for more dollars and more money. At some point, you've got to say, if you build a 5-tier cake, you cannot eat it all. So the good news is we've got a policy which might work for years to come. The bad news is I think we've got to look at spending priorities as well as revenues when we do these budgets. But I'm heartened by the fact I want to celebrate with you the victory for our constituents and the effort we put forth on their behalf to do it. And it's a good day for the New York State Legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Read the last section.
The section.
Record the vote. What happened?
You didn't give her a chance to read it.
Oh, sorry. You have to read faster, Sarah. I voted, didn't I? No. Mr. Peter Rivera to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this January's Journal of Managed Care, which was given to me by one of my colleagues, there is an article which talks about the polling of 100 African American state legislators on the PDL. And 70% of these African American legislators say that the PDL is going to be bad for their communities and for the quality of health in their respective states. To paraphrase a Hispanic expression, there's a Hispanic expression that says, never get between an individual and their food. And that's a warning to people like us, to politicians that like to speak and like to give long speeches and rubber chicken dinners. And the thought is, don't get between a person and their food. I want to extend that idea to what I anticipate will be next year's election. And the idea is never get between a Hispanic person and their medication. I think what a PDL does, it gets between, it puts an obstacle between an individual's ability to get the kind of medication that they're accustomed to get the kind of medication that they need. And I believe that this will be an important issue in next year's gubernatorial race. I think that we have carved the best bill that we can for the time being. That's why I will be voting for this. Plus, it also happens to be the mental hygiene budget, which is the budget that I helped to negotiate. But I also think that it's something that's not necessary. I think when you look at the savings that the governor talks about saving, I think it's $61 million. And if the issue is saving $61 million, we could do it from the health budget. We could do it in at least 4 or 5 different ways. From the rebates that should be coming to the states, to looking at the recapturing some of the cost on generic drugs, to looking at other issues that really would add hundreds of millions of dollars back to the state budget. So although I will be voting for this budget, I think it will be an important issue in next year's election. And if it isn't, I hope to make it an important year in next year's election. Thank you again, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Naomi Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the leadership of this body for the extraordinary work that they did on this budget and all the co-chairs involved from the subcommittees, particularly in the area of the PDL. I know we did with it what we could. However, I personally do not believe in the PDL. I don't believe that it will save the state money. I believe that the cost will shift from prescription to hospital admission and hospital care. And I fear that doctors will not advocate for anything other than what's on the PDL. I fear that because of time constraints, they will not navigate the 1-800 number. They'll be reluctant to do so for patients to get the non-list drugs necessary. And what this means is that the most vulnerable, the poor, the most treasured members of our communities, our seniors and our children, are going to be denied access to drugs which are best suited for their specific needs. I think it's a dangerous precedent that we set here today in the search of new ways to save money and cut costs, because what we're saying is that the final arbiter of medical decisions is not the doctor, but rather the bottom line. Now, as a result of the Court of Appeals decision, I know that I have one of 2 choices: passing the bill with the PDL intact, or passing a Medicaid bill without the PDL. So while the Medicaid bill with the PDL intact is an assault, I think no Medicaid at all would be an assassination. And so while I'm voting for this bill, I want it noted for the record that I am opposing the PDL because, quite simply, I do not believe that it is in the best interest of my constituents. And at the end of the day, this is not about a line item. This is about the health and well-being of all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to explain my vote, I'd like to join many of my colleagues in offering my congratulations to the leaders of this conference and everyone who participated in making sure that we get an on-time budget. I think that under the circumstances, we have done an extraordinary job, and but I want, for the record, to note that I oppose the PDL included in this budget. Under the circumstances, we were somewhat forced to go this route. Nonetheless, I do not accept that we did fight as hard as we should have or as hard as we could have to prevent this from happening. And somewhere down the road, I'm sure we'll realize that we made a terrible mistake. Hope at some point it'll be correctable. Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my request and vote in the positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Powell.
Yeah, quickly, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to have my remarks associated with those of my colleagues, Peter Rivera, Naomi Rivera, and Nick Perry as it relates to the preferred drug list.
Thank you. Announce the result.
Ayes 133, noes 11.
Bill is passed. On the A calendar, Rules Report 35, Clerk will read.
Bill number 553C, Rules Report number 35, Budget Bill, an act making appropriations for the support of government.
Bill is on a debate calendar, Mr. Do you wish to speak?
Who would like the... Mr. Farrell, yield, please.
Mr. Farrell, do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Baraga?
It is my understanding that the overall increase is $848 million and puts state aid at approximately $16.2 billion for the 700 so-called districts in the state of New York. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that, in conjunction with what is raised by way of the property tax and through the federal government, probably puts the figure in total between 34 and 35 billion a year.
With federal money, a little higher.
How much higher?
36, 37.
All right. All right. Because the important thing to point out to the members is that New York State, ranks number 2 in the nation in per pupil spending. We spend roughly about $11,515 per student, and that's with 3.2 million students. So when we take a look at this, we're certainly spending enough money. All right? Let's talk about the operating aid. You've adopted the governor's proposal, and I want to get a sense between the operating aid, the SBE monies, the share concept. It is my impression from our meeting in Ways and Means that in order to achieve the share distribution, New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester County, that everything had to be taken into consideration. Operating aid, SBE, expense-driven aids, everything. Is that true?
You know what, Thomas? I think I'm going to let Steve Sanders pick this up. Mr. Sanders, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did you hear the question? Steve?
Yes, let me answer it generally, and then if you want to pursue specifics, please do. There were the construction of this budget, $830 million on the runs, was done in several different ways, and I think it's important to understand that. And then, if there are questions within that, happy to clarify those issues. Let me just. I think this needs to be laid out. First and foremost, we accepted the governor's proposal. And as you recall, in January, that proposal called for a $526 million increase comprised of 2 basic elements. One, in the formula-driven aids that he provided, of roughly about $201 million. Second, the $325 million Sound Basic Education Fund comprised of the revenues generated from the authorized existing VLTs. We took his proposal, we accepted what the governor gave us so that we were then in a position to make additions because we felt that the governor's proposal was insufficient. Primarily what we did to get to the $830 million year-to-year increase on the runs, and you correctly pointed out, almost $850 million GSPS. Primarily what we did is we then included the cuts that were embedded in the governor's proposal, because even with the $526 million increase, there were significant cuts to BOCES and excess cost aid, et cetera, et cetera. We included the cuts that the governor made. That was roughly an additional $250 million school year. That comprised much of the difference.
So the share concept is a total package. Operating aid, SBE, expense-driven aids. When you take the governor's proposal on flex aid, $1 million increase, the SBE 325, the backfill on the expense-driven aids, when you run it, that's how you got your shares. It's a total package.
It's a total package of the governor's proposal, the restorations, plus some other additions that were made by the Joint Conference Committee.
Am I in the ballpark by saying that when it was all said and done, the shares in New York City approximately 38%, Nassau Suffolk 12 to 13, maybe upstate 49 to 50%?
New York City's share is a little higher than the number that you mentioned, but you're in the ballpark.
Okay. Of the $121 million increase, it's my understanding that 70% of that goes to 207 so-called high-need districts. That's about $85 million. Is that correct?
Well, when you say of the 121, I'm not sure where you derived that number
In the
from.
flex aid, it was a $121 million increase. So,
well,
but 70% of that went to these 207 high-need districts?
Well, we took the governor's flex aid, and then we did two things. We updated, in essence, his numbers, because his numbers were based on November data. So these numbers are based on the most recent SED data. And number two, we added, if you will, an additional tier. After we did what the governor proposed, we added, thank you, Mr. Schimminger, we added an additional layer to the comprehensive operating aid formula that drives additional dollars to the highest need districts in the state. Right. And if you're saying that that produces approximately the percentage of the 121, I'll accept that as probably being accurate. And I thank you for pointing that out, because we did believe that high-need school districts needed more money than the governor would have provided.
As long as we understand with reference to specifically flex aid, the increase of 121, 70% goes to the high-need districts, that's 85 million, and then there's only 36 million left for the 500 other districts in the state. Let's talk about the...
Well,
those are the numbers. On the flex aid, that's the numbers.
But you've taken only one...
You've
taken only one part of the overall construction. You didn't mention, for instance, tax limitation. Now, if you add in tax limitation into the mix, which of course it is part of the mix, money is distributed in other numbers to districts that are not necessarily construed as high-need districts.
Let's take the other big figure, $325 million on the SBE.
Yes.
It's my impression about 86% of that goes to these 207 high-needs districts.
We
$280 million.
Mr. Barraga, as you know, we accepted the governor's proposal, and I think your representation as to the distribution of SBE is consistent with my understanding.
It's an interesting point you make, because when the governor, I believe, presented the SBE figure of 325, that was the first down payment in his approach to settle the CFE case. You rejected his proposal to settle the CFE, had adopted his first-year recommendation. I just have the feeling that the governor would have never made that proposal if he knew the outcome was going to be what you folks did.
Well, your result is accurate, but your characterization, I think, requires a little bit of explanation. In accepting the governor's SBE amount of money, we are recognizing, first of all, we are recognizing that the only constitutional way that we could make the governor's overall proposal right was to accept his state aid numbers. I don't like that. I don't even agree with the court's interpretation, but we have to live with it. So we accepted the governor's formulation as he presented it, but it is very important to note that we have said from the very beginning that that $325 million, however he distributed it, was a very, very de minimis amount of money if you compare what he did with what the court said was needed. So we accepted it, but we don't accept the notion that that advances the resolution of CFE by only a very de minimis amount of money.
So you rejected his proposal as far as a 5-year settlement for CFE. That's what you're really saying.
Well, if you are suggesting that...
you accepted the first year because you had to, basically. But the reality is then you turned around and said, look, we don't regard this as any solution to CFE. We're just going to basically take the money and do the distribution.
Well, Mr. Barrager, if you multiply $325 million times 5, over 5 years, let's say, you end up with a number of about $1.6 billion in
but
change,
there are
statewide.
Well, but
statewide.
Regardless of what you wind up with, and there are federal monies involved and a lot of other things, you rejected the CFE proposal as given to you by the governor. You've accepted the 325, and you did the distribution as he wanted it done.
We've rejected the notion that $325 million statewide even begins to approach what the Court of Appeals and then the referees said was the responsibility of adequately funding New York City and then by extension all the other high-need school districts that are similar to New York City. We've rejected the idea that this proposal with this amount of money makes even a small dent.
The formula used in FlexAid has a regional cost factor built into it. Can you define what that is? How do you define the regional cost aspect of the formula on FlexAid?
I'm sorry, I didn't. Would you repeat that again, Tom?
There are certain criteria used in working the formula for FlexAid. One is the regional cost factor.
Regional cost is...
What is the index you're using to determine regional cost?
Okay. I can't explain to you in detail, Mr. Barrager. It is based on indices that deal with the
I think the chief...
the well-defined costs of certain areas, including teacher salaries, including...
I think that's the key.
I hit it for you.
Taking a look at teacher salaries.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that this regional cost factor is an integral part of FlexAid because
it is.
It's something that some of us have advocated for many years. In the original proposal, the governor was talking about a reduction in private excess cost aid to bring it in line with public excess cost aid. I take it that's been corrected?
Yes, we funded it at present law.
And can you explain to me the building aid provisions? We discussed this in Ways and Means. You have a 5% increase, again, for high-need districts
5%
as far as
increase,
building aid reimbursement?
5% increase for high-need districts and some adjustments in New York City building reimbursement that artificially kept their reimbursement at a lower level than they are expected to get.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sanders.
You're very welcome.
On the budget, on this budget
Mr.
bill,
Barrago on the budget.
obviously most of us have just gotten the runs, so we're trying to ascertain the effect, either positive or negative, on our individual districts. When you take a look at $848 million, it looks like a great deal of money, and it is a great deal of money. I suspect, though, your school districts, as usual, will not be happy. As far as the distribution, I think there's an effort here to hit the high needs districts. But by the same token, I think the governor has been taken in a little, because the reality is his proposal on SBE was part of a 5-year plan to deal with the CFE decision, which we have not chosen to do so. But you accepted his distribution. So I think you have to take a look at your individual district results to make a determination as to whether or not this is going to be in your best interest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, just so that the members know what the little pause in the action is, the Senate has completed their work on this bill, and we are going to wait for that bill to arrive so we don't have to undo a cross. That should happen momentarily, and then we will be able to take the roll call on this bill. So that's the reason we're doing this.
All right, the Senate bill has arrived. So on a motion by Mr. Tokaz, the Senate bill is before the House. The Senate bill is advanced. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Ms. Glick, to explain her vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote, first of all, let me thank not only the leadership in this House and the other House, but all of the subcommittee members who worked on the Human Services and Labor Subcommittee. We came to an extraordinary bipartisan compromise, and the decision that we made in this bill was to hold out the what is referred to as the TANF surplus. It's federal dollars, does not in any way change the fact that this is a balanced budget, but the essential needs of the working poor and poor New Yorkers who are transitioning from welfare to self-sufficiency could not be addressed with the proposal presented by the governor. And we worked very hard, and I want to thank my counterparts in the Senate. We came to a bipartisan compromise. To date, we have not received a single indication of a disagreement, actually, from the executive, and you have on your desks Bill 6846, which is the bipartisan compromise, which is waiting for the governor's resubmission. And we would urge the people who are, excuse me, gentlemen, we would urge the people who are concerned about this to contact the executive and ask that he proceed with a resubmission so that all of these essential programs can be properly funded. And I want to thank again all of the co-chairs who worked so hard on this. And despite the fact that this issue is an open issue, I reiterate, this is a balanced budget, and we call on the governor for a resubmission. I will be voting in the affirmative.
Mr. Scarsborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, want to express my concern about the fact that a major part of this budget, as you see, the title is Labor and Family Assistance as well as Education. A large part of the family assistance is not going to be voted on today. As my colleague, Ms. Glick, just mentioned, there was a bipartisan agreement between the Senate and the Assembly that served the purpose of giving the governor the flexible fund that he wanted, giving the counties flexibility, and at the same time preserving our responsibility to take care of our constituents. The governor refused to resubmit that, and as a result, that portion of the budget is set aside. We do have, again, as Ms. Glick mentioned, the 6846, which could have been voted on had the governor resubmitted. I say that the responsibility for this not being here today, this omission, lies squarely at the feet of the governor. I ask everybody who's concerned about family care, child care, job training, and all of those things that we fight for to call the governor, ask him to resubmit this so we can move this budget. I will be voting for this, but I'm really concerned about that omission. Thank you very much.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to congratulate my colleagues in the Assembly and the Ways and Means staff for the wonderful work that they've done. Under any other circumstances in any other year, this is an excellent education budget. However, these are not ordinary circumstances, they're extraordinary. The fact is we're under court order, we're under court mandate to help to provide a safe and adequate education, particularly to New York City kids. Unfortunately, we have a partner in this budget process called the governor who refuses to honor this court decision and, in fact, is appealing it. The court decision that was reached 22 months ago, almost 2 years, by the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals. Court decision which then mandated a deadline of July 31st of last year, months ago, and yet we have refused to honor, and I say we because, again, we are a partner with this governor in this process. I just hope that at some point we can come to grips with the fact, and the governor can come to grips with the fact, that we have a judiciary branch for a reason, and we must honor, if we are to be a state of, and a nation of laws, we must honor these court decisions as we do the executive branch and the legislative branch. We all have a role in this process for a reason. And again, every year that the Campaign for Fiscal Equity court decision is not honored, there's an average of 100,000 kids that will go by the wayside. They need the resources. They have the capability to learn and to be taught, but they need the resources that are somehow not coming to them. So again, I just hope our message is sent to the governor loud and clear, and that we will continue the pressure on this governor to withdraw his appeal and to finally do the right thing. So I therefore must vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Califf.
To explain my vote, just generally, I'd like to start out with a comment about our process. And I don't know about all of you, but I enjoyed waking up today on March 31st. First of all, waking up is a good thing. But secondly, to wake up on a day where we are going to be voting on our budget before April 1st. And I am just thrilled to be here on this day doing this. The process, I felt, worked extremely well. Very involving of all legislators, whether you're in the majority or the minority. I think we were all there together really talking about these issues, and I think we made a real difference in the process. I would just like to point out in the education part of this budget, there is a component called libraries. And we have good news. We've restored the 5% of library aid that has been cut, $4.5 million. And that is good news. But remember that libraries have been kept stagnant at 1998 levels. That's 7 years of not having an increase. And when you think about all the other issues that play into the cost of running our library systems, our school library systems, our libraries, this is something that we really have to find some better partners in our other house and on the second floor so that we can expand library aid and not have it kind of go off the table at the end of session. So I hope that we have the next time around that we can be up here and say we really did something new and different, not just fighting back the cuts that the governor seems to offer us all the time in the library aid area. And I have a positive vote on this budget, and I'm glad to be voting on it today.
Thank you. Mr. Espiat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank and I want to congratulate the conference committee, particularly its leadership, our education chair, and our speaker for the extraordinary work that they did to try to resolve some of the issues posted to us in this budget, the education budget. And also commend them for their efforts throughout the years, because it has been this House that has taken the lead in making sure that initiatives such as ladder, universal pre-K, additional teacher training, and extended day are brought to our schools, our public school system. It is this House that has taken the lead in making sure that these initiatives come to reality. But, Mr. Speaker, we have faced a crucial decision this year, and that is to whether or not, again, comply with the rulings of the court decision in the case involving campaign fiscal equity. The plaintiff of this case, a parent from my district and a current city council member, and many parents from the city of New York feel that their children are not getting adequate funding in public education. This matter, of course, has been aggravated by the recent governor's appeal to the CFE decision, making matters worse for us as a legislature to really bring additional funding that will bring about a sound and basic education for all of our children. And the funding that we're providing in this budget, although an increase, is still not enough to the thousands and thousands of children in the city of New York and across this state that are facing very difficult circumstances in overcrowded classrooms, libraries with very old books, teachers that are uncertified, and the likes. So, Mr. Speaker, we sit here today celebrating an on-time budget. But I wonder if it's a good budget for the over 150 schools in needs of improvement in the city of New York. We are here celebrating a daylight budget, but I wonder if there is any daylight for the future of all the thousands of children in over 156 schools in the city of New York that are restructuring, forced to restructure because of academic difficulties. There's 333 schools in the city of New York alone that are in need of improvement, and we need to comply with this court order. Mr. Speaker, I will be casting my vote in the negative.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a generation of New York City's children have passed through the school doors since this lawsuit began 12 years ago. And we come another year with the governor refusing to acknowledge the fact that the state of New York has provided insufficient funding to provide New York City's children with a sound basic education. And I think that's a shame that, again, the governor would decide to go the appeals route versus sitting down and trying to find a way to properly educate all of New York's children. Most of those children who passed through our school doors over the past 12 years are unprepared to take their place in the society in which we live in. I don't know if everyone realizes that New York City is the goose that lays the golden egg for the state, and therefore it needs to prepare all of its citizens to be well suited to become taxpayers so that they can continue to pay revenue that the state needs to survive with. the governor, the speaker, and our chairperson of education, I think, they tried very hard to make the difference, and I think their efforts were gallant to try to ensure that at least the schools weren't hurt, both in New York City and some of the other high-needs districts around the state, and I commend them for that. But I would find it very difficult to vote for this budget with the lack of funding that we need for schools in the city of New York. I want to acknowledge that the efforts that they made on school facilities is actually a very good one, and hopefully we will end up with smaller classes, but with more classrooms and teachers that are leaving every 2 years because we can't pay them. It means that our children still won't get the kind of education that they need. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm ending with, I hope that the next budget that we do, since we've fixed the process, and that seems to be the major thing on everybody's mind, maybe we'll be able to get a chance to get to the substance of what we need to be doing for the people, and particularly the children of New York City and the other high-needs districts in the state of New York. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote in the negative.
Thank you. Ms. Peoples.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to first of all, say how grateful I am to have had the opportunity to experience this budget process as I did this year. The opportunity to go to the conference committees was both rewarding and very educational, and I appreciated having an opportunity, and I hope that this process doesn't ever change again, because for both those older members as well as the newer members, it's the opportunity to hear the details discussed between the two houses that bring to us, I think, the kind of information we need to take back to our districts. Secondly, I certainly want to thank our leadership in this House, and particularly those folks who chaired those conference committees for, I think, doing a fantastic job. I was never so proud when I attended the first one, where Deborah Glick and Susan John were leading the charge, and my heart was just pounding as they went through the issues. It was such valiant valor that I was just so impressed to be a part of a body that they're a part of. So I want to say that first. The other thing I want to mention, though, is that while we are, I think, doing a great job with the education piece of it, and we have, thanks to Steve Saunders, included additional resources for the district that I not only represent but love so much, we're appreciative of that, because I know now we're going to get maybe some new computers. We can maybe even decrease class sizes a little bit and add some additional work to the building that's going on there. But there still are yet a couple other problems with the school issues that we face in the state. And, CFE is more than about just money. CFE is about redirecting the formula, how the money is distributed. And I think if we can get to that part, we haven't done that this year. We didn't do it last year. We cannot let that one go. Because until we come up with a formula that's fair, that will always be the same every year, I don't think we're going to solve the education problem in this state. So, I hope that Mr. Saunders and his whole team, the governor and all of his folks, as well as the Senate, will stay on that issue until it's solved, because it won't be fair until it is. Lastly, I have to mention that as of March 15th of this year, the children in the city of Buffalo public schools, as well as parochial schools, are without school nurses. And there are yet 3 cities in the state that have no mandate to require nursing services in school. That's a problem. And while it's not a problem of this current budget, it's a problem that we need to look towards fixing very soon. And I'm certainly directing my comments to all of us, because I think it should be an issue that all of us are concerned about. If there's, it's good enough to have a nurse in suburban and rural districts, and it's good enough to have a nurse in city districts as well. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I certainly am very proud to be casting my vote in the positive.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I too would like to stand and explain my vote. Over a year ago, I had the opportunity to join a group of parents and the lead plaintiff in the case for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, Councilman Robert Jackson, in a march from New York City to Albany, which ended at the State Court of Appeals, in which we petitioned the court to reverse the appeal of the governor, who, as you know, attempted to overturn and reverse the decision of Judge DeGrasse with respect to the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. During that process, before we led that march, we met with children throughout the city of New York, and we heard their pleas. We heard them say that they wanted to pass the Regents exams, but that they could not prepare for the exams because they had no science labs. One child told me she would like to have had a higher score on the biology exams, but they didn't have frogs to dissect within her classroom. We talked to parents in an overcrowded school building in Brooklyn, and I said this before when we were electing the regents, that there was a classroom that was so overcrowded that they converted a bathroom into a classroom, put school desks in front of open urinals, and it's expected those children to learn in that kind of environment. We met with students who said they didn't have computers in order to prepare for the workforce of a new society that's been shaped by the advances of science and technology. And I know that we have appealed to the governor before. I know that members of the caucus met with the governor and urged him not to appeal to the original decision in the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, but he went forth and he did it anyhow. 22 months later, we stand here in this body again seeing a violation of the rights of children in the city of New York. Now, first I want to clarify myself. I think that Steve Saunders and the Speaker, Deborah Glick, and all the other members of the conference committee in this body have done a yeoman's job. In fact, I think when I look at Shelley Silver attempting to deal with the governor and Steve Saunders on the question of education, I believe that, like one person once said, there are few saints in Caesar's palace. What I'm saying is that today I cannot vote for this bill. I know that we've done a yeoman's job in making this bill better, the budget better. But we also stand at a time in which the Campaign for Fiscal Equity case has not been resolved, that we had not only a judicial requirement to resolve it, but we had a moral imperative to do so as well, because those children have been waiting for over 10 years. My message to the governor is this today, and he should know this. On May 17th, which is the anniversary of the Brown decision, if in fact there's no movement with respect to the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, he should expect serious action, even in the context of civil disobedience, if in fact he doesn't begin to address this particular case. Parents are outraged over the fact that this is not being done today, and he could be assured that no one is going to stand silent on this issue anymore. May 17th, Tuesday, May 17th, if in fact there's no movement, he can be assured that there will be people here en masse in Albany protesting this particular outrage. And in this spirit, Mr. Speaker, I stand to say that I'm going to cast my vote in the negative, unfortunately.
Mr. Gant. No, Mr. Gantinero. Mr. Seminario?
Mr. Speaker, I've heard my colleagues talk. I've heard they were dissatisfied with the way the budget's being dispersed. Well, how do they know? How does Roger Green know where the money is going? If I was to ask Roger Green to yield and ask him to give me a breakdown how the money is spent.
Mr. Seminario.
Mr. Seminario, it's not appropriate to use another member's name while explaining your vote.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker.
This is not a debate. You're explaining your vote,
I'm
Mr.
explaining
Seminario.
my vote.
Okay.
Okay, I just happened to mention because Roger was the last speaker, and I apologize to you, Mr. Green. Well, the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, and again, it's so simple. Where is the money being spent? Is it being spent on computers in Buffalo? Is it being spent on repairs in Brooklyn and in Queens? Is it being spent on extensions of schools so that the children could sit? Is it being spent on biology classes or scientific classes? Nobody knows. And you know why nobody knows? Because there is no breakdown on the monies that are allocated and how they're being spent until we get smart to ourselves and find out where this money is going. You're wasting your time with all this nonsense you're giving me today. I've been telling you for 26 years. Get a breakdown so we'll know what's being spent in Buffalo. We know what's being spent in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Staten Island, how the money's dispersed in Long Island. There isn't a person in this room who can tell me how that money's being spent. And until we acknowledge that, you're whistling in the wind, and I'm being polite. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Seminario. Announce the result.
Ayes 136, noes 10.
Bill is passed. Mr. Tokaz.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, just for the members' edification in terms of the next order of business, we're going to take up Rules Report 34, and then we will work on some of the language bills that follow that. So Rules Report 34, which is the final appropriations bill.
Rules Report 34, clerk will read.
Bill number 551A, Rules Report number 34, Budget Bill, an act making appropriations for the support of government.
On a motion by Mr. Tokaz, the Senate bill is before the House. Senate bill is advanced. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Announce the result.
Ayes 121, noes 22.
Bill is passed. Page 4, Rules Report 37. Sub it. On the A calendar, page 12, Rules Report 40. Clerk will read.
Bill number 6847, Rules Report number 40 by the Committee on Rules, an act to amend chapter of the laws of 2005.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Someone's in there scaring everybody back into the chamber, right? Announce the result.
Ayes 134, noes 12.
Bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Tokaz.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have the members' attention. Just so that the members know, there has been a calendar placed on your desk, 41B. That calendar is not live. The purpose in putting that out is so that it ages for Monday, so we will not take any action on 41B. Several members asked me, so there is no action to be taken on that calendar.
On the same page, page 12, Rules Report 41. Clerk will read.
Bill number 6848, Rules Report number 41 by the Committee on Rules, an act to amend a chapter of the laws of 2005.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Announce the result.
Ayes 133, noes 10.
Bill is passed. On page 4, Rules Report 30. One moment. Would everyone please sit down? Put your cell phones away or throw them out. Would members take their seats now? Mr. Brodsky, take your seat, please. I'm holding up the calling of the next bill because members are not in their seats. Page 4, Rules Report 37. Clerk will read.
Bill number 6841, Rules Report number 37 by the Committee on Rules, an act to amend the labor law.
Is sub on this one? On a motion by Mr. Tokaz, the Senate bill is before the House. The Senate bill is advanced. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Announce the result.
Ayes 136, no 7.
Bill is passed. On page 5, Rules Report 38. Clerk will read.
Bill number 6842, Rules Report number 38 by the Committee on Rules.
On a motion by Mr. Tokaz, the Senate bill is before the House. The Senate bill is advanced.
Amendment at the desk.
There's an amendment at the desk. Mr. Seminario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I offer up the following amendment, waive its reading, and ask for an opportunity to explain it.
You may explain the substitution.
Thank
the
you.
amendment.
The amendment before us, Mr. Speaker, would prohibit the use, with 3 exceptions, of state Medicaid funds for the payment of abortions. 1, where the abortion is necessary to save the life of the mother. 2, where the pregnancy is the result of rape. Or 3, where the pregnancy is the result of incest. In cases of rape or incest, the amendment further provides that certain reporting requirements be fulfilled. Mr. Speaker, I move the amendment and ask for its adoption.
The chair has found that your amendment is germane. On the amendment, clerk will record the vote. That's what we do, slow roll calls. This is a slow roll call. Members will please come to their desks to vote on the amendment. Announce the result.
Ayes 43, noes 102.
The amendment is defeated. On the bill. On the bill in chief, Mr. Barraga.
Well, Mr. Farrell, you yield for a quick question.
Mr. Farrell? Do you yield to Mr. Barraga?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Mr. Speaker. Yeah.
Just one question, Mr. Chairman. The language portion of this bill deals with the Medicaid cap and the takeover.
Yeah.
And I've got a breakout sheet here which shows over a 6-year period the total savings to counties. New York City will save approximately $4.7 billion. The rest of the state, $2.2 billion. Comes in close to $7 billion.
Where did that come from, that list? Came from?
Our side was
Oh, your guy.
If you want a copy, I'll be happy to give
Thank
it.
you. I thought maybe our side was sharing with you.
My question to you is this. All of us have had these county executives come into our offices complaining how such a large portion of their county budget consists of Medicaid expense and wanting relief. And this details relief over a 5-year period. How many of those county executives have told you that the relief that they receive financially, they will pass on to the taxpayers, the county taxpayers of their respective counties?
To me, none of them.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Barraga?
Here again, I think the state is making a yeoman effort to bring some sort of relief to the counties. And we've all put up with county executives coming into our offices saying, look, you know, we need help, we need assistance. But none of those people, to my knowledge, have ever made a commitment from a taxpayer perspective to say, look, if we're going to save 100 million or 200 million or 300 million, a portion of that, any of it, will go back to my county taxpayers. Because the reality is, almost in every case, the savings will be spent by those county executives in some other area. In essence, the taxpayer will wind up paying more on a total basis. Because now it'll just come back up to this level, and they're all taxpayers picking up the freight at every different level of government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. Mr. Tanco, to explain his vote.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, across this state, I believe there's been an appeal to this legislature and the governor to provide relief for county taxpayers. Taxpayers are demanding that there be a great bit of attention paid to the saga of growing property taxes. In my home county alone, of Montgomery County, a 40% increase over the last 3 years. To its credit, the Speaker, and to its credit, the majority of this House, heard that appeal. They heard that advocacy from county taxpayers and from county governments to do something about this growing impact. To his credit, the Speaker made part of our resolution that was deciphered by the conferencing committees to support a hard cap, one that did not ask counties to assume additional growth. It would have been good to have more response from the outside world to enable that proposal to have a stronger bit of help in the conferencing that was to follow. Undeniably, there is going to be, with the passage of this bill, an increase in taxes, an increase in property taxes, a most egregious tax, a regressive tax that cannot measure well enough the ability of that household to pay that growing tax. And mark my words, there will be growth to the point that several counties will reach their constitutional tax limit during the span of this property tax relief proposal with the soft cap. The efforts here from this House were, I believe, the appropriate ones at a minimum to start with a hard cap. I am concerned that we're going with this soft cap. I withdraw my request, and I will vote in the negative.
Announce the result.
Ayes 133, noes 11.
Bill is passed. Page 5. Rules Report 39. Mr. Brown?
Mr. Speaker, on the bill. I want
Brown on the bill.
I want to congratulate my colleagues for an on-time budget. In many ways, the process this year worked as the voters in New York expected to do. We had bipartisan conference committees, public discussion of very, very important issues, and five-way negotiations, the first time that we've had that in quite a while. But as we all know, getting an on-time budget is only half the battle. We also need to focus on what's in the budget. There are a number of good things in this budget. The Medicaid cap, which is going to give help to county taxpayers as counties see their tax rates go up and up and up. The Empire Zone reauthorization, and certainly we've begun the process of simplifying the school aid formula. But there are also many serious problems with this budget. It raises taxes by over $600 million in a state which already has the highest local and state tax burden in the country. It increases debt by $15 billion, which piles on to the $130 billion debt we already have in this state, the second highest in the nation. And it increases spending to an unprecedented $106.5 billion. And just to put this in context, that's only $4.5 billion less than the state of California has spent this year, and they are twice the size of New York. My biggest concern about the spending, taxing, and borrowing decisions we're making today is their impact on the decisions made by our children and grandchildren tomorrow about where they are going to live and raise a family, and also their impact on the futures of the communities we represent. Because no matter how well we educate our children, nor how good we provide for their health care, if they can't afford to live in New York State or they can't get a job here, it's really not going to matter. I understand that many of us in this room have honest disagreements about how we best generate and spend the limited amount of money that we have available to us. But I feel strongly that we have to develop a better balance between the need to sustain and grow our state and the need to restrain taxes and government borrowing so that we can make this a place that our grandchildren and children want to live in. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Mr. Farrell yield for some questions?
Mr. Yes, Farrell, yield.
Yes,
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Farrell, in this bill at, I think it's Part CC, there's a provision for an alteration in the division of monies derived from video lottery terminals that is a source of funding for lottery-supported schools.
Yes, correct.
Yes. In that provision, the fee for the operators of the track that have video lottery terminals is increased over the existing fee. Is that correct?
That is correct.
From 29 to 32%.
That is correct.
On the first $50 million amount of money that is derived from this activity. Mr. Farrell, this 29%, as you know, was stricken by the appellate level of the state Supreme Court and is currently a case before the Court of Appeals. If the appellate division struck the 29%, why would they not strike the 32?
Because they struck the 29% because of the suballocation that was involved with that. Once that was eliminated, then the price is controllable. 32% is actually cheaper than what we pay in Lotto, because when you look at it, that 32% actually boils down to 3.5 cents percent, and normally Lotto gets 6% for the dealers, so there would be no problem with the number.
And so the Court of Appeals, in your opinion, or not the Court of Appeals, but the appellate level of the Supreme Court struck the provision because there was a diversion of revenue from lottery to a purpose not authorized by the state constitution?
That is correct.
I see. Further in this bill, there is a diversion to a promotional activity for these tracts to promote this activity. Why is that not a prohibited diversion from the stream of money that's to go to education?
I think of a tree in the forest without a public relation man, will anybody know if it crashes? Well, actually, it's the same thing here. What they want to do, they acknowledge certain monies must be spent to allow more money to come in. So clearly, that would be acceptable, would be appropriately spent money.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, the opinion of the drafters of this bill is that these activities wouldn't support themselves unless they were advertised.
That's correct.
They might pass out brochures at senior citizen centers, come on down and lose your money, or take your chances, I guess,
Yeah.
maybe something like that.
Similar to what the lottery does now.
Yeah, I see. These machines, these video lottery terminals, are sanctioned under this constitutional provision because they are a lottery. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And they are interactive, but the player doesn't have an opportunity to change the outcome of the activity.
That is correct.
And so when a person goes to one of these video lottery terminal parlors at one of these tracks and plays draw poker, where they can hold cards or discard cards, even though it appears that they can use their skill and their knowledge of the odds regarding the game of draw poker, they're in effect have no effect upon the outcome by holding cards or discarding cards.
That is correct.
Then wouldn't you consider that to be a fraud on the public?
My answer is, having never been to one of those places and never intending to go, having looked at all of those large hotels that stand on top of those tables, I've come to the conclusion gambling is a fraud on people, but I don't think everybody agrees with me on that either. So it's just the degree of what is the fraud.
Right.
That was a dance.
Further in this piece of language, there's an opportunity, apparently, for two of these tracks to assign their rights to run this fraud to other parties.
I really prefer the word gambling. Yes, but yes. Yes.
And so not only we authorize this diversion, but we also authorize an assignment to a third party, not necessarily the track operator in these two cases.
That's there to allow management, to allow someone to manage it for them.
But it's exclusive to only two tracks.
Yes.
Other tracks couldn't hire a manager. They have to do it on their own.
Yes, they can. Other ones can.
But their interests aren't protected by this bill.
It applies to everyone.
Well, I'm curious then why two tracks are singled out in this area of assignment. Is there an explanation why we named those two?
Okay.
It's in Section 3 of the...
The reason is, though everyone has it, they're afraid that if the NYRA contract were to run out, they would want to be sure that they could continue to have a management other than them. So that's why it's put in for them specifically.
Now,
Did I get that right?
Mr. Farrell, I have a hard time understanding why we do window dressing in a bill. I mean, this is sort of, you're saying that they have the right, but we're going to make sure they feel comfortable that they have the right by specifically stating it for two cases, but not for the other
Yes.
cases.
This seems to do with whom they're dealing. They just want to make sure that if there's a change in contract, everything will be the same. And that's why they're doing it in these two areas.
So, somewhat of a...
That's wearing belts and suspenders.
a contract of sorts. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Farrell. On the bill, I believe this provision still to be unconstitutional. It does incorporate an increase in the fee that the appellate level of the Supreme Court found to be unconstitutional, and it also includes a diversion. I further feel that the machines themselves, at least in the instance of those machines that put themselves before the public as interactive and games that in effect can be won or lost by the skill of the player, when in fact that's not the case, perpetrates a fraud on the public. And the Attorney General of the state, or perhaps our Consumer Affairs Committee, should be investigating those machines. I'll give you an example which was related to me. If you go to Saratoga and you play those machines that are video poker, and you are dealt a full house, you throw the full house away, you get a full house back. Or if you've got jacks or better, you throw jacks or better away, you'll get kings back. But if you're dealt a winning hand, you cannot throw the winning hand away, because it in effect is not based on the skill of the player. It's a fraud on the public. And those machines, if nothing else, ought to be taken out of these venues, but I doubt that they will be, even though they are fraudulent. But I still believe this whole issue area to be one of bad public policy, and one that we will regret having implemented in this state. The interesting sliding scale here, of course, is in the bill to ensure that tracks that are not otherwise profitable in this operation would be able to be operational and make a profit. Some of the upstate tracks, I suspect, will never realize a percentage of, or a handle sufficient to get them out of the original category of taking 40% of the proceeds here. And this, to me, is a great indicator that these activities really are spurious to begin with. And I would urge my colleagues to vote against this bill because of the inclusion of this particular piece. I'd also point out in this bill, just for the record, that there is about $1.6 to $1.7 billion of additional borrowing opportunity here. Here we go again with increasing the state's debt. I heard previously on the floor here an estimate of $15 billion in this budget being the debt opportunity. I think that's a fair estimate of what it is. I think it might go actually to a greater amount than that. But think of this, in 2 days, this legislature will have authorized an increase in the state's debt of at least $15 billion. Breathtaking, I believe, particularly when we look at a state debt that's currently approaching $50 billion. This, I think, again, is a mistake, and this practice should be rejected. Thank you.
Mr. Baronis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, we have reached a historic moment here in the legislative body by passing today an on-time budget. However, an on-time budget does not necessarily mean a good budget. As mentioned by my colleagues today, this budget has grown to close to $107 billion, an increase of $2 billion approximately, growing by twice the rate of inflation, increasing debt, as just mentioned, up to $50 billion, which will be burdened by future generations of New York State residents. Our tax burden this year increases by $1 billion approximately, ladies and gentlemen. The campaign for fiscal equity that was spoken about by my colleagues so eloquently has not been addressed. Ladies and gentlemen, 80% of the young men who are in New York State prisons are high school dropouts. There is no stronger argument to making certain that New York City schools, the New York State schools, receive the funding that they need. And how convenient that once again $200 million in pork funding is there for our disposal. Yet, as we approach this momentous occasion, we seem to have conveniently swept under the carpet a very important issue that I think affects each and every one of us, certainly the residents of New York State, certainly the districts that we represent. In 2003, we voted to reenact the sales tax on clothing and shoes, ladies and gentlemen. But we promised that tax, that onerous tax, would come back for 1 year. And although it has taken us 21 years now to keep our promise to have an on-time budget, I am fearful as we proceed now into year 2, and as we vote today to once again prolong this regressive tax, I feel that we set the pattern once again for misleading the people and doing a disservice to the people of New York State. The tax on clothing and shoes, as we all know, is a regressive tax. It hurts the working families of New York State. It was mentioned before that there's a saying that don't keep an individual, a man or a woman, away from their medication. I remember a good old American saying that says, don't keep a hard-working man and woman, don't get between a hard-working man and woman and their money. And I think that's precisely what we do with this regressive tax, ladies and gentlemen. Senior citizens living on fixed incomes, small businesses on Main Street, New York State, certainly on Staten Island, on New Dorp Lane, on Forest Avenue. If you go to the Staten Island Mall, you see people fleeing to New Jersey, to a bordering state that has no tax burden on clothing and shoes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to create incentives to keep our citizens here in New York State, to empower the small businesses that create the opportunities and the jobs for our citizens. In today's clippings, we see a headline, tax revamp approved. Legislature hopes to boost business in New York. With all the committees and all of the talk and all of the planning and all of the expenditures to establish Empire Zone and incentive zones, ladies and gentlemen, in our grasp is the most simplest economic development and incentive that we could possibly implement. And that is if we sat and did nothing and allowed that tax to sunset, we'd once again bring people back to Main Street, New York, back to the malls in New York City. There was a quote in our local paper by Speaker Silver that go to Woodbridge Mall and you'll see the lots filled with New York State vehicles and plates shopping and benefiting from that tax relief. Keep in mind, we do not only lose that initial sale on that one purchase of a sweater or a pair of shoes that a mom or dad may travel to Jersey. Once they're in Jersey, ladies and gentlemen, we lose the entire spectrum of spending, of retail purchases. They make it an outing. They'll go to Jersey and they'll buy that garment, and then they'll continue to spend restaurant dollars, entertainment dollars, home wares, and the like. So I want to encourage my colleagues today to keep in mind how hurtful this tax is, but more importantly, how we as a legislative body once again are not keeping our promise to the people of New York State. We've spoken over the past months about reform, and obviously we've been quite successful. We see here today passing an on-time budget. But ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me if we're going to have reform in this legislative body, it should start by each and every one of us keeping our promise to the people of New York State. I encourage each and every one of you to cast a no vote on this bill, where taxes, again, are increased by $1 billion, spending increased by $2 billion, the debt burden that's placed upon future generations of New York State by 50-some-odd billion dollars. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave you with the thought that the people of New York State, certainly back on Staten Island and in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, people that are flocking to New Jersey, the small businesses that are suffering on New Dorp Lane and on Richmond Avenue at the mall and on Forest Avenue, the senior citizens that we visit that complain that they have to travel out of state for those savings, that their families have to travel out of state for those savings. They are all watching us today. And I'm fearful that once again, we have fallen into the tax and spend merry-go-round, so to speak. It's incumbent upon us to begin the reform process by first keeping our word to the people of New York State. I encourage a no vote. Thank you.
Mr. Brodsky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we approach a remarkable and important accomplishment, that is a budget agreed to by the Senate and the Assembly prior to April 1st, there is much to be encouraged about. And if Mr. Schimminger would yield to me for a moment, I would like to understand slightly better some of those accomplishments in matters over which he had jurisdiction during the conference committee debate. As the House may or may not...
You want Mr. Schimminger to yield?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Schimminger, do you yield?
Eagerly.
Gentlemen, eagerly awaits your questions, Mr. Brodsky.
As the House may or may not remember, the committee, my committee and others have conducted a set of investigations into abuses in the Empire Zone program. And one of the remarkable but relatively unnoticed accomplishments of the conference committee process was the recommendations and the agreement on a thorough overhaul of a failed program. Mr. Schimminger, it is my understanding that for the first time we have an effective relationship between the amount of tax benefits a business may receive and the actual amount of jobs or capital investment they provide. Is that a correct understanding?
In Part W of this bill, the Empire Zone program is significantly reformed and provides for a new methodology for the provision of tax benefits to companies which come into the Empire Zone program on or after April 1st, 2005. That would be tomorrow. This new methodology for calculating tax benefits in the Empire Zone program puts a great premium on jobs and the quality of jobs which are being created under the Empire Zone program. The calculation of benefits that is contained in this reform applies only to those companies, I should emphasize, which come into the program on or after tomorrow. For companies which have already been in the program, the current methodology for calculation of benefits applies. But for those companies that come into the program on or after tomorrow, a new calculation applies with a focus on jobs, a focus on quality jobs, and it is a two-track methodology. A two-track methodology which is more or less consistent with that which the Assembly proposed in its budget resolution. The benefits are even richer for those zones which are census tract zones. We call them investment zones under this reform. And in those census tract zones, the benefits are even richer. In addition to census tract zones, the richer benefits occur in the case of manufacturing companies in any zone, and can occur in county zones if a county zone has one of its contiguous areas or two of its contiguous areas or as many as three of its contiguous areas located within qualifying census tracts. So yes, we do reform the calculation of benefits. The answer was yes.
Thank you, Mr. Schimminger. Let me ask you about what we, in our investigations, determined to be phantom jobs, in which companies were reincorporating with respect to doing nothing but reincorporating, and thereby qualify themselves for literally thousands of job creation credits. It is my understanding that that matter has been remedied as well.
Well, actually, that matter was remedied, even though it has been bandied about for many, many months. That matter was remedied back in August of 2002, but it didn't stop a lot of people from criticizing the zone program nevertheless. This problem of shirt change was permissible prior to August of 2002. And there are companies somewhere in New York, I assume, that benefited from those shirt changes. Under these reforms, those benefits that they have had are going to fall under a very intense look. And only shirt change companies which made an investment as a result of being in the Empire Zone, or created jobs as a result of being in the Empire Zone, or which had a valid business purpose in somehow reconstituting themselves, will be able to continue any benefits. And that close look will be taken by New York State Tax and Finance. That valid business purpose test that I referred to, by the way, is not a new test. It's already used in the area of evaluating passive investments. So this is not a new and unfamiliar test. But those companies which underwent shirt change will have to undergo this new scrutiny.
So the improvement, although the bar for future shirt changes was put in place
in August of 2002.
This will apply a valid business purpose test to those who got it when it was a valid thing to get.
That is correct, because there have been no companies since August of 2002 which have come into the program as shirt change companies.
Thank you. Last question deals with contiguity.
No applause, please.
I'm on that. The contiguity test requirements have been recreated here. Would you explain that apparently briefly?
Yes, they have been.
Would you explain it?
There is a requirement that in each Empire Zone in the state, there be a coalescence of the acreage prospectively. In census tract zones, the acreage must coalesce into 3 and, with zone board approval, possibly 4 distinct but contiguous areas. In county zones, the coalescence must occur into 6, and with the permission of the zone board, as many as 7 contiguous areas. If a company is left out of a contiguous area, that company's benefits are grandfathered. But the idea here is to return the zone program to a program which is targeted to areas where there is need, rather than the scattershot polka dot approach into which some zones have fallen.
Thank you, Mr. Schimminger. Mr. Speaker, on the bill, the
Mr. Brodsky.
abuses of the program uncovered.
Mr. Brodsky on the bill. Go ahead.
The abuses of the program uncovered in the hearings that I mentioned earlier have been, in almost every case, substantially and effectively addressed by these reforms and others engineered by the Assembly through the leadership and hard work of Mr. Schimminger and his colleagues on the conference committee. It is a major reform in the way this state does business and is one of the many reasons why, in coming to a conclusion on a timely budget, we have also met the standard of a good budget. I appreciate the work the gentleman did, and I congratulate him and the House for this particular reform. Thank you.
Ms. Calhoun.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, I rise to speak on this bill. Although I'm going to be voting yes, and having been here 15 years, I appreciate very much the cooperation we have all exhibited in coming to this day. But I think there's one item there that needs to be spoken about, and I haven't heard anyone mention it yet. We had put into place a 1/4% increase sales tax. And you won't find it in this bill because it merely was allowed to lapse and sunset, which is fine, and that's good. Appreciate it for all the people of the state. However, what you will find in the bill is the fact that for the 12 counties that constitute the area of the MTA, you will find hidden there a 1/8% increase in the sales tax just for them. And I found it very interesting because during the Ways and Means meeting when this was first discussed, I found it interesting to learn that I'm being told that we are receiving a reduction when in fact the rest of the state, and this includes Orange and Rockland and Dutchess and Westchester counties, all of New York City and Nassau and Suffolk, are actually receiving an increase of 1/8%. But I think the main thing that I would want to say is the counties in the lower mid-Hudson have long complained and brought to the attention of the fact that we do not receive even our fair share of the benefit from the MTA. In fact, that's recognized by the fact that 4 counties share 1 representative. So we each get 1/4 of a representative on the MTA board. But I think it's important that this is not a tax decrease for our members, even though in reality, or for our constituents, because even in reality, while they will pay 1/8% less in sales tax than they did last year, the balance of the state will receive the full 1/4. And I just feel that that is something that is not appropriate because if you should live in the city of New York, the chances are you use the MTA for your basic mode of transportation. In the outlying areas in Orange, Sullivan counties, and not in Sullivan, Sullivan's not included, in Orange and Rockland counties, virtually everyone who commutes and uses the MTA in the city is commuting with a second car. They have the secondary expenses as if they did not use the MTA. And I just think that adding that 1/8% at the same time that we're looking to place a bond act that will provide substantial funding to the MTA for improvements is not the way to go, and I certainly do not support this, although, as I said, you have to look at the overall picture, and on the whole, what we've done here is admirable, and I do support the on-time budget. So while I will be voting yes, I think it's very important that we recognize, and perhaps next year we can take the step of eliminating that extra burden that has a way of, once being placed there, never being removed. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ortloff.
Would Mr. Schimminger yield, please, Mr. Speaker?
Excuse me?
Would Mr. Schimminger, the gentleman who stood up...
Mr. Schimminger, do you yield?
Thank you, Robin. I'd like to go back just a bit to the question you were addressing moments ago on contiguity in the coalescence process.
I don't think the word coalescence is in the bill language. That's my word.
It's an excellent word.
Thank you very
used
much.
It so well.
An excellent tie as
hope
well.
to keep it going. Now the question I have has to do with the actual process of this coalescence. Let me pose a real world question. You have a county, Franklin County, let's take, who has quite carefully crafted out several of these. I believe they were characterized as shotgun or scattershot mini zones, polka dot zones. And they've done that for very good reason, that between the towns of Franklin County there's a little bit woods and rivers and lakes, which is owned by the state and is forever wild and can't be used for industrial development or any kind of development. Now, so I'd like you to talk me through the process that's going to be required in coalescing. In coming up with a contiguous zone, Robin, for example, will a community, if they have a lot that is suitable for industrial use over here and another one over here and a lake and some woods in between, will they be required to include that lake and that undevelopable property in the contiguous zone, or will they be permitted to exclude land that is on which development isn't permitted in any case?
They will certainly not be required by Albany to include the lake. If they choose to include the lake, perhaps for purposes of marina development, they can do so. But this legislation does not mandate the inclusion of any such acreage on lakes or elsewhere. It's totally a local choice. What it does require, to get to your real point, it does require over time a coalescence of zones, and you're asking about a county zone.
Right, yeah.
So a coalescence into 6 contiguous areas but distinct.
I'm concerned.
And with permission of the state board, they can go to 7 as well.
Does the state board have complete discretion to make a judgment about whether a zone is contiguous, even though it might look like some kind of a gerrymander, if it can be shown that the land that's excluded was either residential property or roads or land under deed restrictions or so forth that could never be used? Is it possible to do that?
Yes, the board does have that discretion.
Is the language in the bill itself, the anti-gerrymandering language, sufficiently flexible so that it will guide the communities in doing this?
If it isn't now, it will be. And let me use this as an opportunity to say something, and I'll turn off my speaking light for later, to say that, you know, Assemblyman Ortloff, it's been a long time since we've had an on-time budget. When you do an on-time budget, the time period for drafting is compacted. And there may be somewhere, not just in the zone program language, but elsewhere in this budget, language which isn't quite precise. Maybe some double negatives, maybe some unintended effect. I am very confident, though, that the appropriate cleanups will be made, not only in this legislation, but in all of the legislation that is embodied in this budget, so that our intent is properly effectuated. And I want to say that on the record and publicly, not only to you, but to anyone with an earshot.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
2 other specific questions. Existing enterprises which are grandfathered under this legislation, what happens when their contract expires? Is the right to renew also grandfathered? Or are they basically cut off for after the life of the current contract?
Some of my colleagues on this side of the aisle are noting that the use of the term grandfathering may be a sexist terminology. So perhaps grandperson? Grandparented. Grandparented, okay? Your question is that you do understand that companies in the program now have their benefit methodology grandparented into the future, and that occurs for the duration of their benefit period. The benefit period currently under the program is
10 years. 15?
15 years. Not every company has 15 years remaining, though.
Correct.
So under this grandparenting methodology, it's similar to the pension system that, you know, some of us might be familiar with. You come into the program before April 1st, and you're Tier 1. You come into the program after April 1st, you're Tier 2, or Stage 1, or Stage 2. But companies now in the program are grandparented. Their benefit levels continue for 10 years. That's the new duration. Companies in the program now. Let me correct myself, okay? Companies in the program now, as I said earlier, have a 15-year benefit period. Some of that has run out already on individual companies. But new companies coming into the program after April 1st have a 10-year benefit period.
I'm concerned about the company that has 14 months left on its benefit. And wondering if next year because they're now outside of the newly coalesced zones, whether they will continue to have the same benefit, should they meet the requirements, of course, of executing a new contract, or will they have to move into the new zone in order to enjoy that?
A company in the Empire Zone program enters into the Empire Zone program, I'm speaking now retrospectively, with an expectation of a benefit period.
Correct.
Okay? In reliance on that set of benefits, they do certain things, create jobs and so on. But when they're in the program, they know that that benefit period is for a fixed period of time. And when the benefit period ends, the benefits end.
Then,
That's
final
right.
question. Under the new procedure, a manufacturing company employing 50 or more people can receive zone benefits without being in any of the geographically defined zones. Correct?
That is correct. Manufacturing companies are exempt from the contiguity provisions. Only if they employ,
50
which,
or more.
only if they create 50 or more jobs.
You and I understand that correctly. If I misspoke, create 50 jobs. Does the land on which they sit, these new manufacturing companies entering the program outside the zone, does this
count?
It doesn't count, does it? Toward the 2 square miles.
Doesn't count. No, good question. That would not count toward the 2 square miles or the 1 square miles, whichever type of zone it may be.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you, and I sincerely do like your tie very much.
Thank you.
Can I have it?
Right in.
Mr. Barraga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the last in the series of a number of budget bills before us. I think as I look around the room here, every member, every single member, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of political philosophy, wants to do good things for the people that they represent. And certainly when we take a look at this budget, we're spending $107 billion. So that enables somebody to do a lot of good things for a lot of people. But there always has to be, and I've seen this over the years, a delicate balance between meeting the needs of your constituents, depending upon what you agree to give them, and by the same token, taking a look at what the cost factor is associated with that. Others on the floor, myself, have pointed out this year that spending right now is $1.9 billion in this budget over the governor's budget. Unless I've misread the governor, he has indicated once you go above 1.5, you can well have problems with this budget. Overall spending from one year to the next, up 3.5%. That's twice the CPI of 1.8%. And Ways and Means, the majority indicated with taxes and fees, they're going up about $1 billion. Taxes, spending, the debt picture, that figure runs anywhere from $8 billion to $15 billion, depending upon who you listen to on the floor. What does that mean for the taxpayers of the state of New York? The people who pick up the freight. You don't hear too much about them in this chamber, but that's the other side of the equation. As we are reaching out to help the needs, at least defined as needs, of so many different groups, somebody has to pay for all this. There is a reason, ladies and gentlemen, that Tax Freedom Day in New York State comes April 27th, that we, each and every one of us, has to work almost 4 months in New York State to pay off all of our tax obligations. There is a reason why when you combine local and state taxes, we are #1 in the nation. That's nothing to be proud of. And maybe there's a relationship between those two elements and what we're doing today. Because we don't really make a concerted effort to balance it, to control the spending, to control the debt, to control the taxes. Because we, as human beings, want to satisfy the needs of people who come to see us. And not too many people come into my office saying, we don't want anything, or you got too much money in the budget. They're always looking for additional funding, and we are prone to give it to them. But there's a real danger in that, and it's cumulative. When I say taxpayers, that's too general. I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time and do something I normally don't do. I'm going to read an article that appeared in Newsday on March 21st from a taxpayer. It's entitled, Sad to Go, but So Long to the Cost of Long Island Living. It's written by a woman by the name of Jody Helming, and she lives in Suffolk County. Dear Long Island, we are leaving you. It is sad but true. First of all, we cannot afford to live here anymore. My husband and I both work full-time and have 2 young children. We purchased a 3-bedroom home, much in need of a number of renovations, for almost $500,000. Our property taxes are so high that our monthly payment has become a financial burden we can no longer manage. What has cost us $500,000 here on Long Island will cost less than half of that in other parts of this country. So we must ask ourselves the difficult question: why should we stay on Long Island when housing is simply unaffordable? In addition, the recreational activities in which we'd like to participate all have a cost attached. As we venture out on a Saturday morning looking for a free or low-cost activity, we notice one thing: fees, 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 fees. Fees to ride the carousel in the mall, $2 per child. 2 children, cost $8. Fees to visit a children's museum, $8 per child, $32 for a family. Fees to go to a petting zoo, $12 for adults, $10 for children, $44. Fees to park our vehicles in a lot to go to the beach or a park, $8 unless you get there before 8 a.m. in the morning. So it is not just about affordable housing, it is about affordable living. Life here, then, too often is fraught with complications, and therefore becomes a constant struggle. Our weekdays are already complicated. Since it was nearly impossible to find affordable housing close to where we work, we have a long commute, 80 miles round trip, to work each day. Since we must both work to manage the financial burden of our monthly mortgage payments, we take our 2 young children to a daycare center. And so we want our weekends to be simple. Yet they are just as complicated as we work to try to find ways to combat the cost of recreation on Long Island, not to mention the horrendous traffic. In many other parts of the country, the living situation is different, much more affordable, much simpler, much less a daily struggle. Families who have purchased a home that is most likely much more reasonably priced than one on Long Island can visit museums, brand new parks, with well-maintained, updated, safe playground equipment, clean and new picnic facilities, and beautiful gardens, all for free. We are looking for a better and a simpler life for us and for our children. We think we have found it. So do hundreds of other families whose moving trucks are lined up in back of ours, set to leave Long Island. Give us reasons to stay here, and we will turn our moving trucks around. This lady and her family, they're gone. The real question you have to ask yourself, when we take a look at this budget, when you take a look at the spending and the taxes and the debt, did we help or hinder her and others that will follow? Or will those trucks line up on Long Island and in most other places of the state in droves to get the heck out of New York State? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. That's it. On a motion by Mr. Tokaz, the Senate bill is before the House. The Senate bill is advanced. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Record the vote. We better get chilly. Mr. Bradley, explain your vote.
Thank you. First, let me say I am delighted to be part of the process that is leading to the first on-time budget in 21 years. And I believe that there are some very good aspects to this bill. But I, in good conscience, cannot support a bill that is adding 5 cents per $100 to the mortgage tax, that is adding in 12 counties an 1/8% sales tax, that is continuing the sales tax on clothing, that is raising fees for title from $10 to $50 so that we can reduce the income tax on those who make the absolute highest amounts of income in this state. And that's precisely the choice that is being made by the revenue package that's in this bill. So despite the fact that there are some very good parts of this bill, I am in good conscience forced to vote no.
Thank you. Mr. Lavelle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote, in this bill, there is a tax that was set to expire today. It was referenced earlier, and it's a tax on shoes and clothing of less than $110. What we will be doing with this bill is basically extending that for another year. Personally, I find that to be a tax that hurts the low-income and middle-income people the most, and particularly in areas that are geographically located near other geographic locations like other states that do not have taxes on clothing. This has a very, very detrimental effect on our retail industry. So I rise to state my objection to this part of the bill, but overall, I do believe that our budget addresses so many of the needs of so many of our constituencies that I will be voting in favor of this. However, I did want my objection noted. Thank you.
Mr. Benjamin.
Speaker, I rise to explain my vote. I rise to criticize an on-time budget that unfortunately burdens the people of our state with a host of taxes and user fees. While I support, appreciate, and applaud the merits of our spending plan, I am disappointed by our revenue plan. I believe in the progressive graduated income tax as the fairest means of raising revenue to support government. However, VLTs, user fees, and a sales tax on shoes and clothing are regressive taxes. Wealthy New Yorkers and large corporations should pay their fair share and must do so, and not be permitted unnecessary tax advantages and tax loopholes. Therefore, I vote in the negative. Thank you.
Mr. Brennan.
To explain my vote, Mr. Speaker, in addition to some of the concerns expressed by both Mr. Bradley and Mr. Benjamin regarding our inability to maintain the surcharge on people over, the income tax surcharge on people over $500,000 a year, I wanted to add my voice to that of Mr. Parment in expressing some concerns that the track operators are getting an opportunity to go from 29% of VLT revenue to 40% of VLT revenue to benefit those tracks. And also I'm concerned that, which I don't think is an appropriate thing to do, I think that money should primarily be for education. And also I'm concerned that one of the track operators has had some past corruption problems that have not yet been satisfactorily addressed. And for those reasons, I'm voting in the negative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Brennan, a negative. Mr. Moronis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote, certainly we have lost an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, at this critical moment to show the people of New York State that we're focused and we're willing to reduce the tax burden, the highest in the nation, reduce the spending that has increased by close to $2 billion this year. But as I stated before, more importantly, an opportunity to keep our promise to the people of New York State. We once again extend the sales tax on clothing and shoes for one more year, the most regressive of taxes, hurting small businesses in our communities, and as mentioned, certainly in communities such as Staten Island that is so geographically close to a bordering state where people flock across the bridges to access the tax-free zones. So, colleagues, I implore you and I challenge you that a new clock starts to tick today. Although we met the time limits on this recent budget struggle, a new clock starts to begin today. And there are 365 days to go where we will be once again challenged to have an on-time budget, reduce taxes and spending, but most importantly, another opportunity for each of us to individually keep our word to the people of New York State. Recently, I submitted approximately 15,000 signatures to the Speaker and the Leader and to the Governor of people that signed on to those petitions in support of this sunset, of this onerous tax I'm happy to report to you that a majority of my colleagues in this House signed on to that effort. So I challenge each and every one of you to think hard for the coming vote 365 days from today, and hope that we can remember and be principled enough to keep our promise to the people of New York State and vote no on the tax. Thank you.
Ms. Arroyo?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to congratulate the Speaker and the Minority Leader and each one of the people that worked so hard and so long hours to make possible that today, at this time, we are completing a budget in the 30th of March. You make me feel proud to be part of this House. A budget is not perfect, and no budget will be perfect. We always are going to hear people complaining, and we always are going to hear people thanking us for what we do. But as a member of this House, in 11 years that I have here, today I'm more proud than ever to be a member of this House. My congratulations and my thanks to each one of the individuals that work hard to make this possible. God bless all of you.
Ms. Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just rise to, I'm going to vote for this bill, but I'm rise to protest the major tax credit we're giving to some of the major corporations, some of the media people in this bill at a time when the state needs it desperately. I don't think these are businesses that would leave New York. I think they need to be in New York because that's where New York is where it is, and so I think that this is not a tax relief item that we should be entertaining this year. But I will vote in support of this bill because it does raise revenue to do some of the other things that I feel is important for the state of New York. Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Mr. Speaker, rise to explain my vote. In part, I believe that this bill is inextricably linked to the other vote that I took in opposition to the education budget because I think that we need more revenues. I respectfully would say that I think that allowing additional tax cuts for people making over $500,000 a year would put us in a position of not having the revenues that we need to resolve the ongoing crisis that we have within our school system. I believe that it also reflects something as it relates to the ongoing growing gap between rich and poor within our state and indeed throughout the nation. And in that context where our children have suffered the most because of the lack of resources that we need both in education and child care and other primary preventive services for our children. So with that in mind, I would like to hope that in the future we would move towards a more progressive tax system, and that until that time comes, I would respectfully like to vote no on this particular bill. Thank you.
Mr. Green in the negative. Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to join with many of my colleagues who have so eloquently expressed their opposition to the many regressive taxes included in this package. It is time that I believe a governor come clean and come straight and honest with the people of New York and stop trying to hide the increased taxation on the citizens of New York as thieves. And so I join with those who express that opposition. I call on the governor to do the right thing. If you're going to raise revenues, tax those who should be taxed. We cannot afford to have the wealthiest New Yorkers escape their burden of paying their fair share in the cost of running our state. I withdraw my request, Mr. Speaker, and vote in the negative.
Mr. Perry in the negative. Mr. Rivera. Jose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is indeed a very historical moment, Mr. Speaker. I recall I served in this body from 83 to 87. Then I went on a 13-year vacation, and I served in the city council. But when I last voted during those days, it was an on-time budget. It's some over 20 years ago. Mr. Assemblyman Baraga and I used to look alike. We used to have jet black hair and a lot of hair. And I used to look like him. But I come back, good things in the city of New York, and I begin to look like my good friend, Anthony Seminario. Even though I don't identify with everything he says, but I have no problem looking like Anthony Seminario. Less hair and a little bit extra pounds on the body. I like to identify with the comments of my good friend and one of the fine, in my view, public servant in the Bronx, Carmen Arroyo. I hope that her words and my words do not come back to haunt us, Mr. Speaker. But I believe that I believe that in spite of how we feel with this budget, we are giving the city and the state of New York the voters what they asked for. They asked for a budget on time, and we're giving them one. Yes, we have problems with some of the budgets that we're giving them today. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that if we have to come back here and deal with the budget again, that we trust in your leadership and in the leadership of this body from both sides, that we're going to come back and continue to do the work that we were all elected to do, and that is serve as best as we can, given the situation that we face with. My friend Mironi, I think from Staten Island. You know, Ed Koch said it best. If you're going to live in this state of ours, you have to pay. The money has to come from somewhere. Listen, over half of my salary goes to taxes. But you have to pay. And I don't know if anyone will complain, understanding that we're trying to give him the best budget and understanding that every day that goes on, yes, the cost of living continues to go higher. I just hope that when it's all over, the people that does not continue to suffer are those who least can afford to survive, let alone to try to be successful in our society. And that means the millions of people that can barely make ends meet in our society nowadays. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, congratulations on an on-time budget, and we continue to look for your leadership as we continue to deal with this budget if we have to come back to deal with it. Thank you very much. I vote yes, and proudly do so.
Rivera in the affirmative. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important day. We have passed and will pass at the conclusion of this vote an on-time budget. This budget, as you know, under your leadership, and I thank you very much for that leadership, that under your leadership we have put this bill together, these bills together, and many of, if not all of our colleagues were involved on both sides of the aisle of putting this together to make sure that the policies and ideas that we wanted was out there, that people understood where we stood and why we were doing what we did, but to take our thoughts, to take our ideas, and to put them into actual print, we had to have those people on our staff. So before I vote, I really want to thank all of the young people and the old people also who are members of the Ways and Means staff for the wonderful job that they did. They all know how to spell the word sleep deprivation. I also want to thank the leadership of that staff, Dean Fullahan, Roman Hedges, Steve Flydell, Steve August, for the job that they did, and also to make sure that I stayed in place and did what I had to do. I want to thank Frank Orr and Marsha Coleman. Mr. Speaker, with that, I once again thank you for bringing us to this point, and I vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Mr. Farrell in the affirmative. Mr. Nesbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote. Well, my colleagues, we've done it. And I just had a report from the back. There's still some time on the clock. I think there's time enough for thank yous. And I want to extend my thank you to Governor Pataki for helping drive this process, for the Speaker for his leadership and cooperation with us, especially for Senator Bruno and Senator Patterson for their participation, and personal courtesies to all of you who were members of the conference committees for your hard work and attention to the process here, and in fact to all the members who helped form the political support and the basis for the process that we developed this year. And I'd like to extend also a thank you to the staffs, all the staffs. Our Ways and Means staff, led by Becky Degatti, certainly Becky and her crew worked as hard as anybody in this Capitol. For the majority staff, for their courtesies and for their inclusion of our staff in meetings and deliberations, majorities in both houses, for the Division of Budget for their help and considerations. And I also I'd like to extend a special thank you to Mary Louise Malik in the Senate and John Cape at Division of Budget, and to Dean Fullahan, who has been both an optimist and a gentleman during this process. And it's been an interesting process, and I think a very important one. It started with the governor's submission. Nothing different about that this year, but it was immediately different. We had 5-way public leaders meetings. And those public leaders meetings, I think, were an important part of our success this year. The governor put his 30-day amendments out early, and in our meetings, and I see Alan Hevesy here, we agreed that the state comptroller would be the arbiter, the final arbiter, if we were unable to reach an agreement about our revenues and avails, and of course we did reach that agreement, and I'm sure he's relieved as he sits here. We passed the one-house budgets. We went to conference committees. The staff meetings were 5-way. I think that's very important. They were all public. All open. That public and open process has gotten us to this result. And the result, my colleagues, is the first on-time budget in over 20 years. It's a remarkable event. So what have we learned? We have learned that this process can work. This open and transparent process can work. And we have learned that the product that we get from it is best when the work is done by all of us. Every member here. All the assets that we have and the wonderful staff. All the knowledge that they bring to the table. Both sides of the aisle. 2 floors of the Capitol. working together. That's what we came here for. And ladies and gentlemen, relationships have been developed between the minority and the majority members and the minority and the majority staffs and the staffs in the houses and the second floor, and those relationships will have a beneficial effect on all the business that we do here in Albany for the people of this state. Regardless of what kind of business that is, and regardless of which side of the aisle an idea comes from. Good ideas come from both sides of the aisle. But you know, it's not perfect yet, not even close. There's so much work to be done. I know that we all came here to represent our constituents and to make a difference for all the people of the state of New York. This budget process and the rules changes that we made earlier this year have set us on the path to becoming a better institution, one that has greater capability to serve those people, all of them. We must learn from this process, and we must not retreat from it. Rather, we should continue to work toward improving upon the process and through it our wonderful institution. Today is a day that we can stand together with some satisfaction. But there remains much work to be done. We must continue that work together. And we must use our talents and abilities to resolve the outstanding issues that face us rather immediately this year and on into the future. So let's go together. Let's go forward together. Let's let the advancements that we've begun here to be the catalyst for taking our institution to a new height of service to the people of the state of New York. They certainly deserve that from us. Mr. Speaker, I cast my vote in the affirmative.
Mr. Nesbitt in the affirmative. Let me, before I close, acknowledge the presence here in the chamber of an alumnus of this institution, someone who has gone on to greater heights, and we are delighted to have him here as a guest, the great controller of the state of New York, Alan Hevesy. Let me just, for a moment, restate a sentiment that I have made to you in this chamber many times over the years. I am grateful and I am proud to be Speaker of the New York State Assembly. Never more so than I am today. A promise was made, a promise of reform, of a better government for the people we serve. A promise that echoed from both sides of the aisle. Today and throughout this session, we have kept that promise. The budget we completed could not have occurred without your willingness to sacrifice, without your willingness to compromise. It was tough, I know. And yes, there are some issues still to be resolved. We will maintain our fair and compassionate leadership on the issues that are most important to New Yorkers: education, health care, jobs, better government, safe streets, and a safe environment. What we have accomplished today, we have accomplished as one legislature, driven by the spirit of bipartisanship to achieve one goal: government at its finest. I commend our distinguished chair of the Ways and Means Committee, my good friend Denny Farrell. All of our conference committee members and chairs, our colleagues in the Senate, particularly Senator Bruno and Senator Patterson, as well as our distinguished Minority Leader, Charlie Nesbitt. Charlie, now it's time for us to walk and unplug that clock. But now it's time for the governor to join the Assembly and the Senate in making the right choices and to ratify the first budget negotiated in open and public conference committees by rank-and-file members of both houses from both sides of the aisle, and passed entirely in daylight without messages of necessity. And a budget that's good and fair and on time for the first time in 20 years. With the shouts of reform still echoing throughout the cities and towns and villages of this great state, I have no doubt that the right choices will be made. I thank each and every member of this House for your hard work, your faith, and your guidance. Majority Leader Paul Tokaz, Chairman Denny Farrell, your leadership is key to everything that we do. Thank you. Additionally, let me thank all of our dedicated staffs on both sides of the aisle, many of whom have been already called out here today, for the incredible job that they have done under incredible pressure during incredible hours. I have to thank, once again, my staff, clearly Dean Foulahan, Dan Converser, Bill Collins, Judy Rapfogel, Karen McCann, Roman Hedges, the Bill Drafting Commission led by Randy Bluth, and on the minority side, Kim Galvin and Becky DeGotti. For all of you, I think you have off Saturday and Sunday. Catch up on your rest. Congratulations on a job well done. Relish this moment, and seriously and by all means, there's a lot of work to do ahead. Get some rest. Mr. Tokaz.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, any resolutions?
Excuse me, Mr.
Oh, I'm
Tokaz.
sorry. We need to announce the result.
Clerk will announce the result.
At 2:55 p.m., Mr. Speaker.
I lost the pool.
Ayes 119, noes 27.
Bill is passed. Mr. Tokes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, resolutions are housekeeping.
I have the following resolutions. All those in favor? Aye. Nay. Opposed? Resolutions are adopted.
Mr. Speaker, for Mr. Perry for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Democrats are asked to proceed to the Speaker's conference room for an immediate Democratic conference.
And we believe brief, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I now move that the Assembly stand adjourned until tomorrow, and no fooling around, Friday, April 1st at 10 a.m., that being a legislative day, and that we reconvene on Monday, April 4th at 2 p.m., that being a session.
House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. Monday.